Yes. And go.
Okay. Okay, so welcome everybody. Happy World Oceans Day. I'm very pleased to welcome you all to this panel discussion on COVID-19 and small-scale fisheries in the Caribbean, impacts, solutions, and adapting to an uncertain future, which has been organized by the Gulf and Caribbean Fisheries Institute and Too Big to Ignore as part of the week-long Small is Bountiful virtual event celebrating the contribution of small-scale fisheries to ocean sustainability and innovation. We greatly appreciate you taking the time to join us for the next hour and a half. We have brought together fisherfolk and key regional organizations in the Caribbean to share perspectives on COVID-19 pandemic and also explore possible solutions as we move forward to ensure resilience, equity, and long-term sustainability in the sector. I will be your moderator for this session. My name is Ayinka Grandison, and I'm a Senior Technical Officer and lead on resilience work at the Caribbean Natural Resources Institute, CANARI, which is a regional independent nonprofit organization that has worked across the Caribbean islands for over 30 years to promote equitable stakeholder participation in the management and stewardship of natural resources. In particular, we work with fisherfolk and their organizations to build a capacity to effectively participate in fisheries management and build sustainable and resilient livelihoods, and with fisheries authorities and other relevant agencies nationally and regionally to improve fisheries and coastal and marine governance. To kick us off today, I will now hand over to Ms. Fadila Ali, Assistant Executive Director of the Gulf and Caribbean Fisheries Institute, to provide brief introductions and an overview of the webinar.
Thank you. Hola, buenos dias. Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion. Estamos ofreciendo resúmenes simultáneos a través del Google Doc in el chat box. And I'll continue in English from now on. So the current COVID-19 pandemic is really an emergent socioeconomic disaster. And it has been affecting local fisheries and communities within the Caribbean. From restrictions on fisher activities, disruption of markets, and negative effects on livelihoods, there have undoubtedly been substantial impacts because many islands are heavily dependent on fishing and tourism. Nonetheless, there has also been remarkable innovation in response, such as using technology to access new markets, also finding new ways to preserve products until the markets resume. So this panel discussion is very important to the Caribbean as it brings together various organizations, but most importantly, we also bring together various perspectives from the gender point of view, fishers, fisherfolk organizations, and fishery management organizations, and agencies like the FAO. Collectively, all of these partners can work together to explore various social, environmental, and technological adaptations to propose solutions and advise a way forward. And this fits in well with the Gulf and Caribbean Fisheries Institute's overall purpose, which is one of providing a platform for the exchange of information and perspectives among various stakeholders, such as scientists. Oops, wait, I'm not sure about that, sorry. Yes, I just want to change the slide, sorry. Such as different perspectives among various stakeholders, such as scientists, managers, fishers, other resource users, as well as decision makers, managers, students, and many more. GCFI especially recognizes the importance of engaging and empowering fishers to be part of this process of managing marine resources. And it has developed the Fisheries for Fishers initiative, to encourage this. As part of this, we have the Gladden Memorial Award, which is awarded annually to recognize a fisher who has demonstrated a long-term commitment to sustainable fishing and conservation of marine resources. Thus far, we've had 22 awardees from throughout the region. So far for today, you've heard from one of our winners, which is Mr. Mitchell Lay from Antigua and Barbuda, who won in 2009. And today you're going to hear from one of our other winners, which is Cecily Marquez. And he was our 2018 winner. So that's a little background from me. And I'll hand it back over to Ainka.
Thanks, Fidela. Thanks for that great introduction. So our first speaker for today is going to be Cecily Marquez. He's been a leader in the fishing industry in Grenada for the past 30 years and has had a tremendous impact with his leadership and pioneering role in introducing locals to gear safety in new improved vessels. He's also the 2018 recipient of the Gladden Memorial Award, which recognizes fishers who demonstrate a significant commitment to the sustainable use and long-term conservation of marine resources in the Gulf and Caribbean region. And so without further ado, I'm going to allow Cecil, if he's ready, to give us his perspectives on the effects of COVID-19 on fisheries in the Caribbean.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Let me say a special good afternoon to my colleagues, the other GMA winners around the region. I feel honored and privileged to be here to represent them. We all apply the same trade, and we all know that the COVID-19 have affected us in many ways. Throughout the entire region, SSF have been hit hard with the advent of this dreaded disease, some worse than others. Countries that rely heavily on export and external market, as in the case of Grenada, have taken the full force and frontline battering of the fishery sectors from COVID-19. Entire fishing seasons will be gone, as in the case of Grenada with yellowfin, and in other countries with lobsters and conch and snappers. Grenada as an example, because we all have the same experiences and are suffering the same fate, more or less in almost all the ways. Grenada, for one, exports about 95% of its yellowfin to the United States market, and US dollars in the region of more than $7 to $8 million annually. All these revenues will be lost this year, and I believe in other islands, they too would be losing lots and lots of money. We are now faced with some serious issues affecting our fisher folks. We see a reduction of income for fishermen, divers, pot fishers, vendors, cleaners, and net repairers. If we look at the slide, please. If we look at the issues affecting our fisher folks, lockdown restrictions, fleets are moored and docked due to inability to operate. So most of all, if not all of our longliners have been grounded. About 150 longliners employing close to about 500, 600 people. So that leads to a big loss of income. Shutdown of the entire tourism industry. This we see vendors are displaced with no other means of income. 90% of our females and most are single parents who had large families and households. Access to international markets. We see exporters and fish houses closing down, whereby you have a situation of layoffs. Loss of the supply outweighs local demands. So you have a problem here of saturation in the local market, warranting a price reduction. We see loss again of income because selling it on the local market, you can't sell it for more than $5 a pound. The external market is way up, $10 a pound. So you have a loss there of all these things. Fishermen gravitate to, are in fact looking to preserve, which is more economical than having it in a refrigerator because electricity is sky high. Okay, we see a fear factor. There is fear among all our fisher folks. I see a loss of confidence, and that leads to the fear factor that I'm talking about. There's a fear in the eyes. There is fear in the voices. There is fear of not knowing what happens next year and beyond. There's a fear of not being able to feed the children, a fear of not being able to meet the mortgages and expectations, repair the boats and gears. And I believe the greatest fear of all is in their minds, that they will not be able to live and sustain a decent life they once knew before the scourge of this new century. Adapt to live normal lives coexisting with COVID-19. COVID-19 has taught us a lesson of how vulnerable and fragile our sector can be. In a world where small island states do not have easy access to outside ports and markets, and in the unlikely event that there is another crisis, we are going to face the same reality. Therefore, we have to start exploring new ways and methods of maximizing use of our products. We should start exploring inter-island trade. We can acquire new technologies for smoking and salting, etc., as a safeguard for unforeseeable events. We must encourage fishers to build and manage strong grassroots co-ops and organizations so they can help one another in the time of needs. The Gulf Fishermen Cooperative, helping the retired and elderly fishermen with food during this crisis, is an example for all of us to follow. We must start planning, strategizing, and mobilizing our fisher folks to become proactive and be part and parcel of these organizations. Then prepare to fail the next time. There are bridges to build and many rivers to cross in the years ahead. I thank you very much.
Next up, we'll be having someone, Dr. Patrick Mahoney, join us to talk about some of the gendered impacts on small-scale fisheries. And he will also be sharing his perspectives as the director and senior lecturer at the University of West Indies Center for Resource Management and Environmental Studies. He's doing a lot of very innovative and interesting applied research, focusing on small-scale fisheries and marine protected area social ecological systems in the wider Caribbean, and is also a member of the Gender in Fisheries team. And so we'll be sharing his perspectives on gendered impacts on small-scale fisheries, to build on the perspective shared by Cecil in terms of impacts on fisherfolk by COVID-19.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to see if the technology is still cooperating with me to share my screen. And you should be able to see the glorious logo of GIFT and my credentials. Cecil got us off to an excellent start regarding the overall picture in terms of the impacts of COVID-19 on Caribbean small-scale fisheries. What I'm going to focus on briefly are the differences between men and women in terms of the impacts, and less so in terms of the responses and measures for the policy. First off is to make the point that GIFT is a loose network of about a dozen folks who work in fisheries, from industry, academia, intergovernmental and other organizations, with an interest in gender. And you can see the institutions, the organizations that are part of our network, but also that the Caribbean, in terms of its countries, societies, and fisheries, exemplify diversity, complexity, and we will see in terms of resilience. We work in partnership with a number of agencies and with fisherfolk who have shared their stories. So what I'm going to relate is due mostly to the stories provided by fisherfolk who've been involved in the industry for years, and not necessarily from academic research, which has started and is ongoing through GIFT and its partners. Now, there are many ways in which to do this, and one of them is to look at fisheries value chains, because livelihoods are important, and clearly livelihoods were a large part of the COVID impact, and also the impacts of the responses by governments. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the notion of the value chain. Some people would say going from hook to cook, or as you can see, we can start with the support services, going through harvesting, which is essentially fishing at sea, and then landing the fish for processing and distribution, often by small, often female fish vendors, since the harvest sector and pre-harvest is largely male-dominated. But then both men and women are involved in marketing and sales, and clearly consumption, whether it's in a restaurant or, importantly, in households for its food security. Now, we're going to use the value chain to examine how gender plays out across various countries and fisheries by making very generalized statements. Clearly, as Cecil pointed out, the impacts on the tuna fishery for export are different from the impacts on the flying fish fishery in another country for domestic use. However, we can generalize and we can use some similarities to look at the differences between men and women, remembering too that the value chain is not discrete segments, but there's lots of interactions happening along the way. So let's see what a gender lens provides us with the stories from the fisher folk. Let's start with harvest, support and harvest. Mostly male, but there are a fair number of women that would be involved in some of these services, whether it is, as we can see from this slide, providing services in tackle shops, dispensing fuel, or otherwise. But mostly the impact has been on men in this part of the value chain, who've been impacted by closures of gas stations for fuel, the same tackle shops, hardware stores, and businesses that were restrained and constrained regarding their normal business due to the shortage of customers in some cases and closing due to the restricted operating hours imposed by government. But when men and a few women went to fish, the fish were still there. But then what? Returning to the landing site, the fish market, the beach, in some countries, and it varied quite a lot amongst them, there were challenges where the facilities had restricted opening times and consumers were not flocking to the fish markets as usual. Indeed, because COVID spanned the Easter period, it was one of the hardest hit times of year, because that is when many fisher folk look for high prices and high demand, with high abundance of fish being customary, particularly in the pelagic fisheries. So men were impacted due to fish markets, but as you will see, this also impacted women. In times of scarcity of fish, women often sold fish that were imported to make up the difference. But again, in COVID times, this was often not the case, as restrictions in imports, importers not bringing in fish, consumers not demanding, were still an issue. Young men who did not go to sea worked at landing sites to assist when fish was landed, sometimes getting payment in cash, sometimes getting dinner fish in return for services, cleaning the boat, offloading, such like. And they also were inconvenient. So you can see that a number of livelihoods were affected. And we can look at links between industries as well, because in some countries, small-scale fishers also operate as crew on recreational vessels, charter vessels, which did not serve their tourist clients who were no longer coming to their countries. So there were a number of impacts, and because men, less than women, they're not likely to take advantage of social security services, national insurance, and the like, men were without that social safety net. But let's move along and look at processing and distribution, which is dominated largely by women, fish vendors, hawkers, known by different names in other places. Their role is a key one, because without them, there is no real link in many places between the fish that are coming in caught by men and the consumers or the first-hand sales businesses of supermarkets, institutions, school meals, feeding programs for children, and so on. So I mentioned the impact that Easter had also on the women, but let me stress here that one significant difference is that women, more than men, also needed to take care of domestic duties. So not only their livelihoods in the fishing industry and at fish landing sites, but domestic duties in the home. Children were not in school. Many families would have had the elderly who were at risk from COVID-19 requiring additional care. Forests to supermarkets and stores could become major outings due to their restricted opening hours and long lines. So women, in many cases, due to their domestic duties, in addition to the livelihood hardships of the industry, were deeply affected. This has persisted and will persist perhaps even beyond when men are freer to go fishing. So women indeed are key in their role in the value chain. Moving swiftly on to the last part of the value chain, marketing, sales, and consumers. We already mentioned the declining demand amongst consumers, amongst the demand from tourists and hotels, restaurants, and such like. And this is only slowly easing up. In many cases, women would have been harder hit because they tended to have mixed livelihoods that would have involved also these services. Imagine the fish fry areas at Oistins in Barbados, Guave in Grenada, Grosile in St. Lucia, which provided value-added products, with many women being involved in these, more so than men in a lot of cases. Children not going to school also would have had impacts on food and nutrition at the household level and household well-being. Many households, as Cecil pointed out, are female-headed, and that's important in terms of the disparity and impacts. Many women and men were quite innovative in terms of ramping up their sales to the extent possible by using ICT, Facebook, WhatsApp, calling circles. Both men and women use this to a large extent to sell packaged fish for convenience, which was an asset to women in preparing meals, perhaps more so than men. And both men and women showed leadership, altruism in donating seafood in some countries to charitable causes, to those who are in need and more vulnerable, receiving praise from both the general public and also from political leaders. So in summary, the gender aspects of Caribbean small-scale fisheries are not yet well documented, but there are clear differences between men and women along the value chains, and we do have stories. We do have information and observations as to what these differences are and maybe why. But COVID-19 is not isolated. Many of these gender differences are not much different from those with coping, climate, disaster, sargassum. So it should not be seen as an isolated set of gender situations. Gender mainstreaming isn't customary in many Caribbean fisheries, and therefore there's a need to do this. At the level of the institution, the individual, and policy responses will need to be more gender responsive than pre-COVID. So thanks for your attention, and other colleagues are going to deal more with some of the responses that need to mainstream gender as we move ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick, for that very insightful presentation on gendered impacts on small-scale fisheries. Next up, we'll be having Maren Headley Dr. Maren Headley is representing the Caribbean Regional Fisheries Mechanism, which is an intergovernmental organization made up of the 17 member states. And she has been working in the sector for over a decade and is involved in provision of technical support for member states for capacity building in climate smart fisheries planning, disaster risk management, and strengthening of fisherfolk organizations and implementing small-scale fisheries guidelines throughout the Caribbean under the Common Fisheries Policy. And today she'll be looking at responding to questions related to what have been some of the responses, solutions by fisherfolk and fisheries authorities in addressing impacts from COVID-19 and identifying any specific trends and particularly any innovative or creative solutions that have been put forward. And so with that, I will hand over to Maren.
Okay, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'll just get straight into the presentation. The Caribbean Regional Fisheries Mechanism is an intergovernmental organization with its mission being to promote and facilitate the responsible utilization of the region's fisheries and other aquatic resources for the economic and social benefits of the current and future population of the region. The CRFM consists of 3 bodies. These are the Ministerial Council, and that is made up of ministers from the countries with portfolios in agriculture, fisheries, etc. The Caribbean Fisheries Forum, which is made up of the Chief Fisheries Officers and the CRFM Secretariat. There are 17 member states in the CRFM. As you heard, CRFM is the Secretariat is the competent authority for implementing the Caribbean Community Common Fisheries Policy and the Protocol on Securing Sustainable Small-Scale Fisheries for Caribbean community fisherfolk and societies. The protocol seeks to implement the voluntary guidelines for securing sustainable small-scale fisheries in the context of food security and poverty eradication. And just to put the value of the fisheries for the CRFM member states in context, in 2018, the total estimated value of the marine capture fisheries was a little over $5 million US. And for exported fisheries products, it was estimated to be a little under $3 million US. So in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Secretariat launched a rapid assessment in May of this year to determine the impacts of the pandemic on the fisheries sector and the effects on production, markets, fisher livelihoods, and food security. 15 member states responded to the survey, and there were 2 surveys. One was targeted at the Chief Fisheries Officers and the other at fisherfolk. And 12 fisherfolk organizations responded to the survey from various countries across the region. So some of the findings you would have already heard Cecil talk about some of the challenges, and Patrick also mentioned some of the issues the fishery sector was facing. So the impacts on demand and livelihoods, overall, there was a decrease in demand for fish by restaurants, hotels, wholesale retailers, and processors and exporters. And this reduced demand directly affected fisherfolk livelihoods, with the majority of fisherfolk being unable to meet living expenses due to reduced incomes. Most fisherfolk also feared that they could only manage 1 month before facing significant economic challenges. But interestingly, there was an increase in demand noted by some member states by households. And this highlights the importance of the local markets and points to the need for strengthening the local value chains and improving food sovereignty. From a regional perspective, in addition to health and economic concerns, the pandemic poses a significant threat to livelihoods in the fisheries sector and food security. Some more findings on the impacts on supply chains, and you would have heard some of this previously. As a result of the safety measures, such as curfews, closed borders, and states of emergencies, the supply chain was impacted in various ways, including reduced number of fishing days, closure or reduced hours for market operations, disruptions in air and sea freight, disruptions in transportation logistics, and also processing. And then there was also reduced access to fish and seafood by customers, and inadequate storage facilities, because in some cases there were surpluses, and because of the decreased demand, there was an issue with storage. In terms of support measures that were provided by the private and public sector, these included delayed or reductions in utility payments, deferred mortgage payments, social security and unemployment payments, microloans, and stimulus packages. However, many of the respondents, both chief fisheries officers and fisherfolk, requested additional support. And these included measures such as promotion of fish consumption, development of online marketing options, and facilitation of intra-regional and international trade. So those were some of the findings for the 15 member states and the 12 fisherfolk organizations around the region. In terms of the way forward, these findings and recommendations will be presented during the upcoming 14th meeting of the CRFM Ministerial Council. And it is expected that these survey results will be used to inform priority actions that will minimize the impacts of the pandemic within the fishery sector at both the national and regional levels, and also take advantage of opportunities that may arise from the pandemic to improve the fishery sector and livelihoods of fisherfolk and fishing communities. And the findings will also support the implementation of the CARICOM COVID-19 AgriFood Risk Management Framework and Action Plan. Now, in terms of proposed solutions, I have a few here by area. So what's needed in terms of policies. Regarding the immediate response to COVID-19, and this response is expected to take place between May and December of this year, there's a need to include agriculture and fisheries personnel in the category of essential workers, which would allow ease of movement. Another priority action is intensification of the provision of income support and food grants to vulnerable populations to respond to loss of income and closure of schools where you have children that are dependent on lunches from these programs. In the medium to long term, which is 2021 and onwards, and in order to support regional food and nutrition security resilience, some of the priority actions would be an integration of right to food concepts and principles and good governance practices in national, legal, and institutional frameworks for food and nutrition security. Also, to develop a regional roadmap and funding approach to support doing business environment reform, and also removal of all remaining non-tariff barriers to trade. And this is referring to sanitary and phytosanitary and technical barriers to trade. In terms of solutions at the institutional level, the immediate response, some of the priority actions will include strengthening research and development in key agri-food products and the value chain, assisting member states in the implementation of national operational plans, and development of regional guidelines for agricultural health and food safety inspectors in member states on personal protection during the pandemic. And for the medium to long-term response, two priority actions would be to improve technical support and extension services using modern models of delivery to support capacity enhancement of value chain actors, and also creation of an information system to manage data and regional statistics. Moving on to proposed solutions and regarding investment, and it is expected that this would be led by the private sector. For the immediate response to COVID-19, some priority actions would include strengthening the local supply chains, particularly linkages between local fishers and supermarkets and retailers to improve consumer access to fish. Also, development of an online portal for marketing of fish and seafood products, and promotion of regional arrangements to ship fish and seafood among CARICOM member states using existing fishing vessels with the capacity to travel amongst the countries, and also reducing dependence on formal external shipping arrangements. In the medium to long-term response, two priority actions would be to facilitate the introduction of greater modern and climate-smart technology into the agri-food sector, and also development of a cross-border corridor food production and investment system. And finally, some proposed solutions regarding the agri-food sector and financing of the sector. For the immediate response, priority action would be to identify accessible and sustainable financing for actions related to the agri-food system. And for the medium to long term, establishment of a regional agricultural development and emergency response fund or facility leveraging underutilized regional financial capital. So that's the end of my presentation, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maren. That was very interesting in terms of the findings from the survey with the fishers as well as with the fisheries authorities, and also for hearing some of the proposed solutions, which gave us some food for thought. So next up, we have Yvette De Rudy, who's representing the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO. She's the Fishery and Aquaculture Officer based in the Sub-Regional Office for the Caribbean in Barbados. She coordinates as well the Secretariat of the Western Central Atlantic Fishery Commission, WCAFC, and she's going to be responding to questions around what are some of the key challenges and opportunities facing small-scale fisheries in the Caribbean moving forward in light of COVID-19 and other risks, and what do we need to do to address these. So without further ado, I will hand over to Yvette.
Hello. Let me share my screen. Oops. Okay. Hello, you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
But you don't see the presentation?
Yes, not yet.
Not yet. Share your entire screen. Yeah. Okay. Sure. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Do you hear me? Do you see the presentation now?
Yes, we do.
You do. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for having me in this panel discussion to share the perspective and experience of FAO. It's a real pleasure, and I would like to thank the organizers in this regard. So this presentation will be centered around three headings: The first will be the Sentinel that is here as an introduction. Then I will present what FAO has been doing since the onset of this global pandemic. And the last part will be on what is in the pipeline, what priority actions are being taken in order to address the challenges posed to small-scale fishers. So in terms of setting, we all know that this pandemic, it doesn't discriminate. It affects each and everyone. So irrespective of your wealth status or your location, it affects everyone. However, we know as well that from empirical data or information, we know that the pandemic does not affect all people in the same way. That densely populated, malnourished, and poor population are more prone to lose their job and be infected by the virus. They are more so that they have limited access to health services, the protective material like the gloves, the sanitizer, and the mask that are needed. They have limited access as well to social protection and economic packages. With regard to small-scale fisheries in particular, there is also an evidence of that, and the previous presenters they elaborate on it, which is that they have been reported to be among the hardest, the daily hit by this pandemic. So, and it affects the whole value chain. Patrick presented it, and Cecily as well. The whole value chain is affected. And that's a real concern, because we know that small-scale fisheries importance is beyond global reach. And in the Caribbean here, small-scale fisheries is one of the pillars of the agriculture sector. And it is about the food safety and nutrition of the population, but also the livelihood and well-being of these men and women tirelessly working to put the fish, to have the fish on our table, because we know that almost all their landing go to domestic consumption. So you imagine that's why FAO, within its mandate, invested, as early as in March for this year, when the pandemic started. The first case in the Caribbean here was around the 10th of March with Jamaica, if I remember well. FAO, engaged in raising the understanding on this, on the challenges that are posed to small-scale fisheries market and sustainability, and devising some solution. This was a rapid assessment through the field offices, also some regional fisheries body, regional fishery management and advisory bodies. We have WCAFC, CRFM, and also OSPESCA in the Central American region. These actually, cast some light on how the COVID-19 is affecting the fisheries and aquaculture food system, and provided led to some finding that were then transformed into some action, like such as the development of a policy brief, which consider the management and policy implications of the COVID-19 and its, how to address it. One key aspect that that came up in this rapid assessment and needs actually to be underscored is the sustainability of the resources of which the fishers depend on. And this sustainability is strengthened as a result of limited or poor at sea inspection, activities, the monitoring, control, and surveillance, the enforcement. It's not something that has been measured, if you want to ask me, but we know that from experience, when there is a limited enforcement, when there is no at sea or very limited at sea inspection activities, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing is more likely to occur, and at a scale there is also the tendency to do the poaching in no-take areas, such as the MPAs. So pressure on the coastal and nearshore areas that we know, the reef, the seagrass bed, the mangrove, and there is also the likelihood that the distant water fishing fleets could fish in the outer boundaries of the exclusive economic zones of the countries. So it's called for measures to be taken in order to ensure that overexploitation does not occur. Not only that it doesn't occur, but also it doesn't increase further, because we know that in this region, in the Caribbean region, many stocks are already heavily exploited, heavily impacted by the level of the exploitation. So it's through understanding of this aspect need to be made in order to devise the post-COVID-19 stimulus and the revival measures that consider the environmental sustainability and are not to the detriment of the resources. If you remember, because of the particular emergence of this pandemic, the coronavirus, in connection with a local wet market, the seafood market, there were rumors that fish consumption could intensify or exacerbate the spread of the virus. So this allegation will have been very, very disastrous on the demand of fish if they were not, disputed. And this is something FAO contributed to in setting the factor to show that it is highly unlikely that people can contract COVID-19 just by consuming fisheries and aquaculture products. So instead, we have been also promoting the consumption of fish, promoting the fact that fish, we need it during this COVID-19 period. We need a healthy diet. We need safe fish. So this with fish, it's not only about protein. Fish is more than protein. It's a nutrient-dense food which has health and protective benefits. So this is something when we are supporting some intervention or initiative led by fishers, like here in Barbados, we have our colleague Carlos Fuentevilla from our office, FAO office, here is being interviewed and promoting the fish consumption and the benefit of consuming fish, which in the other will lead to the increase of sale, then income for these small-scale fishers. We did also partner with CARICOM, the Caribbean Disaster and Emergency Management Agency, and our sister UN organization, the World Food Program, in a quicker assessment. This gathered some data on impact to livelihood, food security, and access to market. I might say that this quick assessment has its own limitations, which is that because of some connectivity, it was through social media, email, and web-based. And these are very limited fishers were represented in this study. But it has the value actually of providing an overview of the impact, the scale of the impact. And also the finding play more or less in the subsequent partnership, which was between CARICOM, ICA, the Caribbean Agriculture Research Development Institute, and FAO, with the CARICOM COVID-19 AgriFood Security Action Plan. So this is what we have done so far since the onset of the pandemic. Now, within the recovery and emergency and recovery actions, so we are currently repurposing the field program, our field program, coordinating the resource mobilization effort. When we say repurposing, it's we have field program. We're trying to de-emphasize some activities and having some activities, more activities focused on COVID-19.
Unfortunately, it seems we may have lost Yvette. She might be having technical difficulties. I'll just see if she's able to get back on. Just give us 30 seconds. Okay, so while we wait for Eva to rejoin us, I'm going to suggest that we start taking a couple of questions from the chat that have been posed so far. So for now, we've had a couple of questions posed for Maren, as well as for Yvette. So Maren, I'll let you take this one. So there was a question on transforming the current RFBs in the region to full-fledged RFMOs, and whether this should not be on the midterm to long-term solutions list.
Hi. Okay. So just for information purposes, there is actually a working group that WACAFC and CRFM and OSPESCA, another fisheries body, is on, and they're considering this reorientation process. However, it's still in discussions, and but there is concern by member states about the role of this body and their responsibility over resources that are within the coastal area of the member states. So this is being discussed, and so yes, there's a need for it, but we also need to decide on the final organization and their roles. Thanks. Maybe when Yvette comes, she could add some more.
Okay, great, thanks. I think there was also one other question posed, which is whether the figures in the CRFM survey cover aquaculture production.
Right. So thanks for that question. And in my presentation on this slide, I had the correct figures, but I think I said the values wrong. So the total estimated value for the marine captured fisheries production was about 500 million US dollars. And for export, it was almost 300 million US dollars. Though the exported figures, that does cover aquaculture products, but for aquaculture, the total estimated value in 2018 was around 50 million US dollars. And yes, we do address aquaculture as well in this organization. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Maren. So far we haven't had Yvette rejoin us yet on the stream. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add all the panelists and take some more questions from the audience so we can start the Q&A session and maybe move into a panel discussion for the last half hour or so. So let me just bring back up all our panelists. And Fadil, I don't know if you have any other questions that you want to add as well, or maybe you can respond to some of the questions as well for now, if possible. So I am seeing a question that was posed quite early on, referring to the need for health and safety assurances to encourage confidence for consumers when buying fish during this time. I don't know who on the panel wants to speak to how to ensure that confidence to consumers. Maybe this is something for Cecil and for Maren or anybody else who wants to take a stab at it.
Well, I can have a first go. CRFM was part of a improving sanitary and phytosanitary measures project about 2 years ago. It's EU funded, and there's a 11th tranche project going on with EU funding again, that's being implemented by ICA, and CRFM has a role in that. So that's looking at the value chains and improving the sanitary and phytosanitary measures for fish products and fish markets. So, and labs to also test the products and make sure that they're up to international levels. So that could help, but I'm not really sure that maybe the person could add a little more.
Yeah.
Hi, sorry, Cecil, do you want to add anything there?
Yes. We have very high standards for food security. For one, we have to meet high standards for export. Hence the reason why, when you probably would have seen it in the in one of the slides, that we ensure all our boats have ice boxes and very, very strict sanitary conditions. We also follow HACCP guidelines in FDA in all our handlings of fish. So I think we have a very high standard in that way.
Chair, I would also add that from another angle, the communication of health and safety assurance in terms of seafood generally is critical. Seafood is very diverse, and it is not as if you're saying beef or pork or chicken in its diversity. And consumers often need to be reassured how to handle fish, seafood generally, not only fin fish, but shellfish safely for their families. And it's really important. Fisher folk play a vital role here, both men and women, but again, probably mainly women, in assuring that households can consume food safely, and perhaps that consumers need not turn from the fish landing sites and their high value and nutritious goods to what they find in the supermarkets, including imported materials that may be inferior and perhaps selected on the basis of price rather than food and nutrition criteria in some households. So I think that these are important points in terms of going ahead, not only related to COVID, but generally.
Okay, thanks. So hopefully that answered the question, comment posed by that person. I'm just checking the chat to see if there's anything else in terms of questions that people are interested in having answered. I'm seeing one comment noted by someone from the Environmental Protection in the Caribbean organization, EPIC, where they've also noticed an increased amount of reports from local monitors on, I guess, harvest of seabird eggs. So I guess maybe people looking at alternative ways to boost their income, livelihoods, given that they're having some limitations in terms of being able to fish or to earn money that way. I don't know if anybody has anything to add to that or responds to that.
Well, perhaps one observation, certainly seen in the mass media, is that nature or the environment seems to have benefited tremendously, depending on how you measure it, from COVID-19 and the reduction in terms of human intervention. It would be interesting perhaps to see if there are at least anecdotes from folks who work on reefs and other places in mangroves and otherwise that may have been harvested, if there's been any difference within the Caribbean. But that is really an aside. But a point well taken about endangering livelihood when the going gets tough.
Thanks, Patrick. I see that Yvette has rejoined us.
I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry. I got electricity off here for about 15 minutes or so. I didn't know that I was off even. It's my son who came up to tell me that there is no electricity. So I was up to the end of the presentation talking without being, listened by anyone. So, sorry.
Okay. So would you like to quickly finish your presentation?
Yes. Which slide I was?
I am not sure until you put it up. So let me just sort of let you finish off your last few points, and then we'll come back to having a panel discussion to wrap up. Okay.
So because when I didn't know when the electricity went off. I was quite far away. Okay.
Yeah. So if you share your screen, I guess we'll tell you.
Oh,
finish up.
Yeah. I'm so sorry. Okay. So not from the beginning here. Where here?
I think you were further along.
Here.
Next slide.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you'd reach here. What is on the way?
I reached here. Okay. So here the Caribbean assessment or study that will be commissioning soon. This one it's very soon. In partnership with the ministry in charge of agriculture. This include fisheries, CARICOM. A point that I was making is that FAO will only be facilitating the process, but it will be led. The drivers will be our partners, the ministries and the extension officers in different ministries. That study will look at the whole value chain with the broad range of actors, having the two gender lenses that was indicated by Patrick, because we know, as he said, that the role of women is not limited to processing and marketing. Women are investors. they provide a critical input to the value chain. For instance, the fund, as he said, or the fishing fleet. They are managers of household fishing receipt when their husband are involved in fishing and they aren't. They are also consumers, and they make an important decision on the nutritional aspect for the family. So the study will look at all these aspects of the value chain when it will be targeting these five audiences or five target for the study. Those one you will see that for the last the extension and the specific ministry, we will mostly deal with for the management of capacity and all these related to the enforcement and to the support to the value chain actors. So as you know, we also value the partnership. Partnership is critical. That's what we've done in previous study, and we think that we need to build a further partnership and strengthen the existing partnership that we have with CRFM, with Canary, with CNFO, UWI, with Patrick, GCFI, the Fisheries Authority, and the National Fisher Folk Organization, and collaborating with key other partners in order to build a more resilient fishery sector to external shocks, which are the shocks, such as the COVID-19. So the collaboration that we see in the near future and need a champion. It's towards the development of a roadmap for the preparation for the International Year of small-scale fisheries and aquaculture. This is important to start now having the institution in the region, the stakeholder, the fisher folk to move into the process of preparing this International Year for artisanal fisheries and aquaculture. So I would like to thank you, and sorry again for this interruption by the electricity here. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, Yvette, for being such a trooper and still completing your presentation. So now we're definitely going to move to the panel discussion. So I'm going to bring back our four panelists and pose some questions to them. Let me just check to see if we've gotten any additional questions from the panel. So no, it doesn't look like we have any additional questions here. So one question that I had that I thought would be very interesting to pose to you was thinking about COVID-19 in light of other major sort of threats, stresses that we're seeing to the small-scale fisheries. So for example, sargassum influxes have started already. A lot of the east coast of many islands are already covered in terms of sargassum. And then we also have the hurricane season, which was just started in June 1st. And it's expected to be a worse than normal season in terms of the number of hurricanes and potentially the strength of the hurricanes and storms that we'll see. So recognizing all these different threats, how do you see that we can have a more holistic kind of response to COVID-19 in light of some of these other threats, disasters that are facing the small-scale fisheries?
So the question is posed to.
So that's a general question to the panelists. Yeah. So I don't know, whoever wants to take it can take it. Yeah. Multiple people can respond if they wish.
Yeah. I think in my presentation, this is something I touch upon regarding the other external shocks or the other challenges, or whether they are sargassum or the hurricanes, which is ahead, or we are going through the hurricane season, which is to have this broader understanding of how within the current, because COVID-19 is it's an opportunity. There were already some vulnerabilities, and these come on these vulnerabilities or these underlying vulnerabilities to worsen them or so what needs to be done is to get a full understanding of all these, or how each one interact with each other, how these are new challenges or impact on the existing one, and get some solution that's take into account the situation, the contextualizing the situation, because from one country to another, the situation may be different, even though there are some general patterns. So having this understanding and contextualizing the solutions to each of the situation will be the best approach. That's why in the survey that we'll be having, it is for us, it's important so that each country has its own survey, and within the country, each region, something which is more targeted to better devise the solution. So that's that will be my preliminary response to this question.
If I may come in, yes.
Sure, Cecil.
Yes, I would like to take the first part of this question about the inter-island regional trade. There are vessels big enough to ply that route, especially near islands like Trinidad to Grenada and up the other islands, St. Vincent, Dominica, St. Lucia. It could be done through the exporters that we have right now and with boat owners, because air transport might be too expensive, so we should look at shipping. Yes, definitely. Some of these boats have the capacity to do the trip.
Okay, so I think Cecil actually started to respond to a question that was posed by one of the audience members. So just for clarity, does anybody else want to respond to the earlier question first on a more holistic response to COVID-19 in light of sargassum, hurricanes, etc.? And then we can continue to answer this question that I've just put up on the screen.
I'd like to add to the discussion on how states could prepare for addressing events like hurricanes and other catastrophes. I'd encourage member states to make use of insurance schemes that are being offered, especially through CRIP, that cover things like tropical cyclones, hurricanes. Two of the member states are already utilizing this facility, and the funds are available, so that's another option for preparing for disaster.
Can I also add that while COVID-19 has certainly sharpened our awareness that there can be surprises, and it's not only on the community or the national scale of sargassum, but global in this case, I think the overall watchword, as with climate change, is really to up the game of adaptive capacity. And again, looking at the gender side of things, we have, and looking at youth, we have in some people's mind a generation that marginalizes young men. And there are young women who are very well qualified and therefore it is very ripe for further gender mainstreaming in terms of building adaptive capacity across the board, even in preparation for the next surprise, whether it be a pandemic or something else. Good food for thought, and will keep us busy for decades.
Thanks, Patrick. So yes, there's certainly a lot of food for thought. So how about we move to the question, which I think Cecil began to respond to, which is looking at promotion of regional seafood shipments among the CARICOM member states, and how this would be accomplished, whether it be using boats owned by fishers, for example. And so I think this is a larger question about, I guess, how to kind of start thinking about stimulating trade and as a response to kind of recovery of the small-scale fisheries in light of COVID-19 impacts. So Cecil's already responded, so if anybody else wants to add to that. And particularly, we're asking whether CRFM and others have a vision for this. So I don't know if Maren wants to take the question.
Well, just to follow up, Cecil had started on the idea would be for fishing vessels that have the capacity to make these trips and also carry and store the fish. So Cecil already made that point. So that's just a follow-up.
Could I add that much of it may also have to do with how we construct or deconstruct tariff regimes, because it has a lot to do with cost, even more so than the desirability of the seafood product. I'm sure many of us would like seafood from our neighbors, but often it is more expensive to obtain it than from faraway places across the world. And with WTO and other tariff regimes in place, we need to have a broader look, not only at seafood, probably, as well as other things in terms of, as we mentioned before, so food sovereignty as well as security. But well worth exploring in more detail. I'm sure since CARICOM has a policy and an implementation plan on food security, that will soon be brought to light.
Okay, thanks. There's also a question here that's been posted, which I'll put up on the screen as well. So what will be some of the pronounced impacts on fish stock due to the reduction in commercial as well as maybe sport fishing within the Caribbean due to COVID-19 impacts? Will this have any sort of benefits in terms of a sustainable increase in stocks?
Yeah, I can briefly elaborate on that one because that was also in terms of sustainability of the stocks. Yeah, there is a concern that this concern is driven by experience, but it's not an empirical information means that the stocks are under threat because of COVID-19 or also. But we know because without the enforcement, there are malpractices. But on the other hand, we can also say because officials are not going to see, there is less pressure on the resources. So that's a question that we cannot respond currently saying the resources are overexploited because of the COVID-19 or less exploited. But we know based on the measures that are in place. So that's the reason why our approach is to recommend in the subsequent study that this be investigated as to which extent the sustainability of the resources have actually been affected by the situation which is unfolding or which has been unfolding for the COVID-19.
Okay, thanks, Yvette. Anybody else have a response to that? If not, we do actually have another question as well. So this one is looking at if there are any recommendations to lower the vulnerability of the small-scale fishery sector to look at possible future pandemics regarding, I guess, recommendations specific to domestic markets. And so I don't know if anybody has any specific response to that. I think we could also even broaden the question to think about maybe what are some of the specific sort of stimulus packages that we would like to see that can help to reduce vulnerability in the long term, as well as improve sustainability of the small-scale fishery sector. And I think that's a question that all of you could possibly respond to.
Mm-hmm. The stimulus packages need to be first social safety nets, and I mean, and as I presented, I mean, the social protection measures needs to be part of the measures. I mean, also providing the inputs, I mean, in terms of cash or in kind to these fishes, that will, I mean, not only stimulate the production, but for the domestic market that we're referring to, it is important to have this type of input for small scale fishes. So this is important. The safety net and the economic packages need to be made available to fishers. And as we are developing their capacity to, I mean, to be able to seize this opportunity, which is offered in terms of empowering for the ICT and all these tools that are needed as well. You may have the input, you may have your fish, but you need to be connected to the market, or you need to get other thing, and that's how, I mean, this digitalization actually is really also at the center of our intervention in FAO. So that's what I can say in terms of stimulus packages, the social, the economic, in terms of in-kind or cash, and I mean, fishers access to ICT with the capacity building activities. Yeah.
I would like to say that we were not deemed as essential services. Hence, we were not included in any stimulus package. And I find it very strange. So I cannot speak very much on that.
Yeah, I think in terms of it, I mean, CRFM may say something about it. I think they cover in their study within the Caribbean from their membership or which countries where fisheries was considered as EBO, which is essential business operations. But from the information that we have, most Caribbean countries or here CRFM or countries or ministries have taken steps to consider small-scale fisheries as essential business operations. So they had their specific benefit. Sure, I mean, for the measures, the opening hours were limited, and I mean, the social distancing had to be applied, but they were not among the facilities which needed to be closer, as it was in many cases. So that's what on this specific point for the EBO or for the essential business operations, I think the Caribbean has done greater in terms of considering small-scale fisheries. But CRFN can say something about it because I know they covered some of these aspects.
Right, thanks. Just to follow up on Yvette's and Cecil's interventions, 12 of the 15 member states did respond that fishers were considered essential workers, but that's different. That's different from the stimulus packages. The stimulus packages provided differed by member states. So some member states offered things like boats and engines at a extended period for payback, duty-free concessions on fishing rights. Those were two different things and varied by member state. And in terms of reducing the vulnerability of the small-scale fisheries sector, from a CARICOM perspective, they want to reduce the food within the next 5 years by 25%. So I think now is a good time. The pandemic has highlighted the importance of the fishery sector for food sovereignty, and this should be a way in for the small-scale fishers to and supply fresh, nutritious food. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Patrick, would you like to chip in on this?
Perhaps just by generally saying that let us stimulate responsibly, remembering the small-scale fisheries guidelines and the usual guidance from good fisheries management. Both fisheries managers and people in the fishing industry, obviously supported by academics, need to make sure, I do think, that stimulus packages are available for the small-scale fishing industries, but ones that do not then serve the purpose of defeating the point of making them more resilient due to non-fisheries views of expanding and escalating practices that may not be consistent with good fisheries management, but well needed and should be much discussed. And I'm sure fisher folk have very useful inputs to make that are practical, which is really what we need.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. So yes, I think thinking about how to blue or green the recovery packages to make sure that they are building resilience and ensuring sustainability in an integrated and holistic way is certainly something we want to be looking at. And I see that we're actually running sort of out of time. So I'll pose one last question just to wrap us up on what's been a very sort of lively and interesting discussion. So I think thinking forward in terms of where we want to see the small-scale fishery sector, I noted that Yvette ended her presentation talking about the fact that it's going to be International Year for Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture in 2022. And so, I mean, what's your vision, I guess, for where you want to see small-scale fisheries by 2022? What are some of the next steps that you'd like to see taken so we can sort of end off on a sort of positive, very practical note in terms of the discussion? So I will let each of you sort of give a short sort of response. So I see Patrick is unmuted, so I'll let him go first.
I was going to leap right in and say that from the perspective of the Gender and Fisheries team, GIFT, our aim is really to see gender mainstreaming through the implementation of the small-scale fisheries guidelines, obviously covering a lot more than gender. But by 2022, I would hope that the guidelines not only are enshrined in policy as they are in the Caribbean Community Common Fisheries Policy, but they're also institutionalized in the practice of small-scale fisher folk everywhere. And we're working on some of that in partnership with FAO right now, and that's really what I'm hoping for.
Thank you, Patrick. Who wants to go next?
Okay, I'll go next. I would like to see a lot of more resources put into training, especially to the young fishermen. I would think that we have to work on a change in attitude towards the trade. We have to make fishing is as important as any other trade on earth. It's modern, it's scientific, but we still lack that kind of attitude towards it. Most of our fishermen still see fishing as a low-down trade that they go out and catch fish, drink rum, and forget about tomorrow. So I would like to see a lot of more training and a lot of more research being done there, and to guide those young fishermen along the way. Also, I would like to see a lot of more education put into the small scale sector as regard practicing best practices. We still see, and in fact, it's all over the place. They use the old gears, discarded gears that are thrown onto the reef and thrown into the ocean, which cause a lot of hazards. Added to that, I would also like to see strict measures from policymakers put into things like net size to help preserve species on the brink, like flying fish, sailfish, blue marlins, etc., etc. Some of the sport fishing is a big part of it too. Some of the nets that they were using, those giant killer nets that float in the ocean and kill fish, just about any time. So I would like to see a lot of more training, a lot of more education. Safety at sea, I would like to see a lot of that. Most of our young guys don't have good navigational skills, right? So I like to see a lot of resources pour into that. Then and only then, if we help change attitudes, then and only then, we might be making some inroads.
Okay, thanks, Cecil.
Yeah. I think Cecil, was very comprehensive in his talk, which is, because this year it's an opportunity. The International Year is an opportunity actually to promote the SSF guideline. So moving ahead or in terms of vision, that's the core element for these guidelines needs actually to be mainstreamed, as Patrick said. And when we say these core elements, these are the elements that were mentioned by Cecil in terms of the working conditions, or in terms of the decent work, or in terms of capacity building, in terms of safety at sea. So it's safety throughout the value chain, not only at sea, but even in the post-harvest fisheries, or safety is needed. And in terms of social protection systems, these are core element of the SSF guideline, as well as the other aspect connected to the environmental degradation, having a healthy environment for these fishes. So I think this is this should be mainstreamed, whether in the packages that is mentioning in terms of having more resources invested, but also into policy. That's a unique opportunity for the International Year of Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture. So that's what I can say. But my first point, before going to this, I would say, first thing I wish to see small scale fisheries recovering, overcoming this COVID-19, and then we move together in terms of preparation for the International Year for Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture with these core element of the SSF guideline mainstreamed. Thank you.
Thanks, Yvette. So, Maren, you have the last word.
Well, all the previous speakers touched on very interesting points. And for 2022, we'd also like to work on mainstreaming gender and strengthening the value chains for, especially for the small scale fishery sector, improving safety at sea, and decent work and youth involved in the fishery sector.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I think with that, I'm going to wrap up the panel discussion and just say thank you to everybody for participating in the discussion, and in particular to our four panelists, Cecily Marquez, Dr. Patrick Mahoney, Dr. Maren Headley, and Dr. Yvette De-Wadri for their presentations and insights into addressing COVID-19 impacts. And also thanks to my co-moderator, Fadila Ali from the Gulf and Caribbean Fisheries Institute, and of course, Too Big to Ignore for organizing and hosting this event in celebration of the World Oceans Day. So thank you so much for your time. And also note that this will be posted, I think, so people can access the panel discussion on YouTube. And so we look forward to people sharing it with their colleagues who couldn't attend. So good afternoon, everybody. Have a great evening. Bye.
Bye. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody.
Bye.